Hello, I'm Debs Kay. Thanks so much for joining me today, and welcome to my little studio. Alright, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a time-lapse version of how I ended up finishing off this little painting that we started last week with the wet and dry underpainting. This is a time-lapse version of how we sort of went through the base layers and up to the finished piece. I hope you enjoy the video. Please do give me a thumbs up if you do, and let's get painting! Okay, so let's have a little look at the colours that I've used then to create this painting. As you can see there, I've got a mixture of soft pastels, a few hard pastels in there, and some pastel pencils which I used to help me blend and also for the finer details there. Obviously you can pause the video at this sec if you want to have a little look at those, but don't panic too much if you don't have those exact colours. You know, we've all got different palettes, and for example in this particular one I haven't gone sort of identical to the reference. I've got a little bit more aqua in my feel. That was just a personal taste, and that's the thing. Pull out the colours from your own palettes that you like and you enjoy. Okay then, let's get painting. Okay, as I mentioned in the intro, if you're not sure how I got to this point here, have a look at the video on creating a wet and dry underpainting. I'll pop the link down below for you so you can have a look at that and so you can see sort of like just how I got to this point. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're going to create our base layers, which basically means sort of like the next set of layers up. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with my darkest values first, and I've chosen a lovely rich dark blue here, and I've used, and as I mentioned, I'm sort of going more towards the aqua side of blue. I just love the colour combination of purples and aquas, so I've decided to go a little bit more along those lines. But that's just it, you know, you choose from your own colour palette, you know, the colours that you enjoy, you know, because it'll really help you, especially when you're doing a painting like this, because, you know, for example, on this one, I've decided I've set myself up a challenge here. You know, I really want to create those ripples, so I'm going fairly close into to the reference photo in this one, you know, because I want to see, you know, just if I can get the effect of those ripples and things. And talking of the photo, I do at this point just want to give a big shout out to a lady called Sandy Bell, who's one of the lovely photographers over on Paint My Photo, who's kind enough to share her work with us to have a go at painting. Obviously if you want to have a go at painting this little duckling yourself, I popped the link down below for you and you can go and download the picture photo for yourself. All right, so let's carry on then. Where were we? Yeah, as you can see, I'm sort of choosing areas, and as I go through this I tend to you know, in general I'm working from dark to light, but I do things, you know, I do things as I see them, the things that are more clear to me, because in a painting like this it's pretty complex, you know, all those you know, I have set myself, you know, quite a challenge, you know, to get all those ripples and things, to, you know, to get them to feel like they are, and it's quite complex, you know, all those shadows and reflections being created in the river there. So this particular painting takes a lot of layers, because as I say, I want to create that realistic look about it, so it takes a lot of layers. This particular layer, obviously initially I'm concentrating on the river here first. I want to get sort of like that next feel up, you know. I'm not being, as you can see, it's still fairly rough, you know, it's still fairly you know, rough in its appearance. I'm not being too pernickety, but I am sort of looking at that reference photo, making sure that I'm getting those shapes right, really, and those the sort of levels of light and shade in an area, to a point. You know, I come back in later on, you know, and this particular painting takes quite a lot of refining to actually, you know, the differences in those, in the you know, in the river, in those reflections and where the ripples are and things. The differences are very, very subtle, you know, in certain areas, you know, the level of light and dark. So this particular painting really requires me to look. And that's just it. When you're wanting to paint something realistically, that's where observation really is the key, and really looking at what you're doing. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in this instance, what I'm doing is I'm I'm coming in and, as I say, creating those next base layers, really just re-establishing what I've done in my underpainting there, and just getting that, that bit more pastel on it. And as you can see at this stage, I am still blending with my finger, because I want the river, I want that to be really lovely and beautifully smooth. Once I've got enough pastel down on the paper, and I can use my fingers in the gesture of things are going. So I'm automatically getting a sweep and sort of starting to get natural, going from natural gradients, I guess, going from one colour to a next. Because, as I mentioned earlier, it's those subtle differences on this that are going to make the difference. So now, as you can see, I'm coming into my little fluffy duckling here. He's such a cutie. Sorry, I can't resist a baby animal. Anyway, I'm coming into here, and what you'll notice from the photographic references, in the reference, our little duckling is quite sort of black in his appearance. But I want to. Black is quite a challenging colour in a painting. It often deadens things, and it's quite harsh. So I don't often use black in a painting. Occasionally I do use it for accents, or if I want a really, really dark area. But in general, my darks, my darkest levels, even if I'm painting black, I will be using perhaps the darkest red. In this one I'm using a really dark blue and a really dark red, to give to visually it will appear as if he's a little black and yellow duckling, but he's going to be a little bit more interesting, and he's going to have the colours of the river and things within him. But as I say, if you want to go sort of closer to the reference, you choose the colours that you enjoy. Certainly on this you could go more sort of darkest greys and browns and things for that to represent that black coat. Really, just it's totally up to you. But I would be a little bit careful of using black as such. Just choose your darkest values if you can. Or if you haven't got really dark, if you're struggling on sort of like your levels of darks, because often that's if you buy a set when you're just starting off, if you buy a set of pastels, often you haven't got those sort of extras, your really darks and your your sort of really lights. You sort of the value range is quite small when you're buying a set. So if you're in the stage that you're at that, you can always put, like, say for example, if you want to darken a colour, what I would do is I would put the closest dark I have to it in the colour I want. So say for example, if I wanted sort of blue in an area, I would put down my darkest blue that I've got, and if I'd felt that wasn't dark enough, I would then put a soft layer of say a black or a darkest grey on top of that, and then I'd go back in with my colour on there. Then you've got the two, if you kind of scumble those together, then you're giving that black a little bit more depth in it, rather so it won't deaden your picture. So as you can see in that black area of that duckling, I've used a really dark blue and a really dark red to give me the and obviously the purple, that gorgeous rich purple, which I've used sort of like towards the edges, where his little feathers are going to be going out across over the river, and you're seeing the river through those. So I'm sort of introducing that lovely purpley tinge. And then in the yellowy areas, I've gone for sort of like a sort of ochre, and then come up through the value scale. I think I've got three sort of different values in these sort of yellowy areas. And then obviously for his beak, I've used some purples and just tipped the edge off his beak with a little bit of pink there. As I say, I come back and sort of add more colours and refine this sort of later on or whatever. But what the purpose of that little sort of session was that you've just seen is to create our base layers up, and then each layer gets a little bit more complex. Now, I did just want to point out at this stage, you might be noticing as you're looking at the reference photo up in the corner of the video there and my painting, I've got slightly different proportions going on there. Only only reason being is that I had this particular painting was a 9 inches by 12 inches, and I just happened to have a piece of paper that size, so I decided to use it because I thought that the duckling would work equally as well, you know, if the proportions of the river were slightly different to the reference photo. And my piece of 9 by 12 paper was actually Fisher 400, which is probably my favourite my favourite pastel paper. If you haven't got which is a sanded paper, if you haven't got a sanded paper, you know, don't worry too much. Ideally, if you can, you know, there's some other great sanded papers out there. You've got UArt, and Lux Archival is another lovely paper to work on. If you're wanting a realistic look, ideally, you know, get a paper that can take a lot of layers. So if you can't get sanded, you know, you can go with something like a pastel matte, or I'm sure there's others out there that will take a few layers, but you will need something that will do that. Possibly a Canson Mitence or whatever. Probably, you know, you will get a duckling, but it will probably be more painterly in its feel, which obviously, you know, you can do, and you can take your painting as far as you want it to go to. As I say, in this instance for me, I wanted to go for a more realistic look, and so, you know, that's why it takes a lot of layers and a lot of hours actually to do. This is very deceptive. I think the whole painting took me around 10 hours, but as I say, it was a challenge for me, and it was a challenge for me to really see if I could get those ripples and things. So it took me some time, but then I found it a wonderful therapeutic process, you know, because I'm painting something that's lovely and gentle and, you know, warms the heart and things. So, you know, I was quite happy to get lost for 10 hours in it. But obviously, if you don't want to spend so long on a painting, you can certainly, you know, go for a more painterly look. You know, sort of like a little bit more impressionistic. And this little duckling would work absolutely, you know, beautifully in that instance as well. But if you'd like, obviously, to come and watch the full-length version, come and join me over on Patreon, where I've got it down to about 5 hours. We managed to reduce it a little bit, where you can actually, you know, where obviously I slow down to not quite as slow as my incredibly slow speed, but I slow down, you know, because obviously this is a learning curve for me, and so that's why it sort of like took me a little bit longer. But I slow it down to a pace that you can actually paint along. And paint along with me, and obviously I give you a little bit more detailed, detail as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing things, and, you know, what I'm using, etc., and how I'm discovering how to get these ripples. It certainly was a learning curve, and great fun one too. Anyway, you might just notice there, I've actually got it under my hand there, because obviously now I've started to get quite a lot of pastel on this paper now that we've got our base layers down, which I'm pretty happy with. And what I'm doing now is I'm coming back in and, you know, we're starting the refining process and really looking closer. But you might just notice there, I've got a little bit of paper there in between my hand and the paper, because what I don't really want to do is you know, I do tend to rest my hand on the easel sometimes. You know, if I do that on that pastel, I'll end up with a nicer aqua and navy hand, and I'll also end up sort of smudging those pastels underneath, which I don't really want to do at this stage. You know, I've kind of got the shapes pretty much there, and I don't really want to have to go and redo them so much. So as you can see, what I do is I've just cut myself off a bit of glassine paper, and I put that between my hand and my paper that I'm working on, which means everything underneath where that paper is kind of going to stay where it is and hopefully not get too smudged, and it means that I can, you know, use my leaning board. And so now we're sort of having got our base layers all in place. Now what I'm doing is I'm coming back and I'm starting to refine things. And as you can see, I've introduced some pastel pencils there now. Now, you know, where we've got so many complex ripples and things, I felt the pastel pencils, you know, were really helpful in this. Obviously, you could do it all in pastels. It's just that, you know, the painting's fairly small. There's quite a lot of detail. So if you do have pastel pencils that you can mix along with your soft pastels, if you're going for this realistic look, you'll find it makes your life a lot easier. And with my pastel pencils, as you saw from the colours there, I've gone for colours that are sort of similar in to those that I'm using with my soft pastels, so that I can use them as blending tools, and sometimes obviously also to get that detail. But at this stage, I don't want to be sort of using too much of my hand to blend, or I don't use any other equipment, no sponges or anything at this stage. And if I'm doing any blending with my fingers, it's very, very light and very subtle. I'm trying to do as much blending with the pastels themselves and also those pastel pencils. And what I'm doing is I'm going around, and this is where I'm really paying attention to my photographic reference and starting to add some intermediate colours. And as I say, starting to sort of blend these areas in together, so it feels like it's flowing and all smooth. But I am paying particular attention to my reference photo to look for those subtle changes, to really see where the value shifts are changing, and it is actually a good idea if you're struggling to see your values, because it can get a little bit complicated in colour. A good idea is to, you can always turn your picture, your photographic reference, if you can turn it into a grayscale, and you can also take a picky of your own painting and turn that too into grayscale, put the two side by side, and you can see whether you've got your values right. And when you're painting realistically, that really is the key. It's observation and values. They're the two things that really are your bestest friends on when it comes to painting realistically. Really seeing what you're looking at, and really noticing those subtle changes in those levels of values of lights to darks. So as I say, as you can see, I'm coming through with those, sometimes I'm coming in with the softer pastels themselves, other times with the pencil. I'm sort of going through and starting to really pull this little duckling together. So I'll let you watch these next few minutes, and I'll pop back in. And so I'm coming into the end of this little chap having his little first cruise out. I'm pretty happy overall with him. I think possibly in hindsight, looking at the picture now, I probably would have liked to get a little bit more of that warmth through his yellow coat there. And I probably would have liked a little bit more perhaps orangey tones in there. So if you're doing it from scratch, I'd suggest maybe, dig out a couple of your oranges under there and see if you can get a little bit more feeling in that. But I always do like to have a look at my paintings afterwards and give them a quick critique as to perhaps what I can do, or what I should do differently. And in this particular one, as I say, I would have liked a little bit more warmth in that coat in hindsight. And also possibly I've made him maybe a week older than he actually is. He's not quite as fluffy as his head shape's not quite exactly the same as the photo. But it didn't matter to me as much because, as I say, my aim in this was to really get those ripples, and the duckling's cute enough whether he's a week older or not. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me. I'm new on here and obviously I'd like to bring you as many videos as I possibly can, so if you subscribe to my channel, that will really help. And obviously, as I say, if you want to have a look at the full-length version of this, you come and join me over on Patreon, and I can show you just how I created it. All right then, thank you so much for watching and spending some of your time with me. I do appreciate it, and have a lovely day. And in the meantime, happy painting.